23,000 subscribers. I can't thank you all enough for the support here right on GlobeTrotting lately. It's greatly appreciated. Now, for today, aircraft deliveries, aircraft retirements, and aircraft orders. They're all a fundamental part of an airline business, as one simply can't function without aircraft to fly. However, what happens when all these, that are supposedly meant to intertwine with each other, go out the window? Well, you're left with an airline like Lufthansa, which, as you could argue, made some pretty big changes to its business over recent years, and it's something I wanted to explore. The mistakes, the decisions they made that were reactions to the situation ongoing, and how they've had to go back on their changes. So firstly, let's explore the Lufthansa fleet at the time of recording, very briefly. If you're interested in a more in-depth look published on the channel recently, there was coverage on their full fleet. But the airline flies a handful of types, including the A320, A321, A340, A319, and with the A380s to its name alongside the 787s and A350s. Through the dreaded 2020, well, it wasn't a year to remember for most, and certainly not for the aviation industry. It incurred some of the largest difficulties it's seen in recent history. As a result of the pandemic-related restrictions and demand, Lufthansa took it as an opportunity to make significant changes to their operations. As such, the airline announced it would restructure and downsize its fleet. Unfortunately, what this would mean is several aircraft types would hit the chopping board, including 6 of its A380s initially, with the intent to remove the aircraft for good. Additionally, they also announced A340-600s, 7 of them would be departing, with 5 747-400s. At the same time, other aircraft types were also slated to depart, and yes, while these were all eventually going to be retired, they were massively accelerated. A340-300s were also put on the chopping board. The A340-600s were really the center of attention, as only a matter of weeks after the initial announcement, Lufthansa changed their mind, saying they would now decommission all their -600s, highlighting how the fragile nature of the ongoing situation meant that while an airline could announce something a couple of weeks later, that would no longer be valid. And it really also showcased the significant changes that were taking place at the German flag carrier, transforming the way that it was going to look and likely emerge from the pandemic. At least, that was maybe the plan. While they weren't the only airline to be doing such a thing, these were still very monumental changes. They were also changes that resulted in a loss of available capacity, which made a lot of sense for Lufthansa at the time. Not only had demand dropped, but the ability to fly international services was also seemingly impossible. So, therefore, removing aircraft from service that were already headed out with the expectation that new deliveries would come made perfect sense. With analysts and much more predicting demand wouldn't return for many years. By that point, based on delivery schedules, while yes, Lufthansa would lose capacity in that period, by the time they were expected to acquire new aircraft, it would tie in with the expectation that demand would return. So in the meantime, they would just make do with what they had. However, that's where the airline was caught mainly out. And they weren't the only ones, it must be said. Still though, given the scale of the changes they announced at the beginning of the pandemic and the repercussions on the overall fleet, paired with these delays to inbound aircraft, they were really thrust into disarray. 2024, as you may recall, was initially quoted at times when we would see demand return. The reality, well, by the end of 2021, demand was surging in some markets and airlines were scrambling to keep up. Lufthansa were left in a position where it just so happened that the aircraft that they offloaded were all their high-capacity jets. Yes, they're inefficient, but it was the likes of your A340s, 747s, and A380s, in favour of a smaller, streamlined long-haul fleet, and all their incoming aircraft were delayed. As such, the airline raced to return aircraft back into service to help cope with the demand that they were seeing on almost every single front. As such, the airline raced to return aircraft back into service to help cope with the demand that they were seeing on almost every front. and in most cases, the planes that were returned to operations had at one point seemingly no chance of coming back, and were really only being returned as coverage until the next equipment arrived. The Airbus A340s was really the spark of the first of a significant number of changes. While the Dash 600s seemingly were all but done for, Lufthansa did reveal that the aircraft would return a couple of years ago. However, they said at the time they would only fly for 1 year before being removed again. They were really a short-term solution. That, though, as you would expect, didn't last very long, with the airline backtracking at the beginning of 2023, noting that a further 5 Dash 600s would return for this summer season and be based in Frankfurt. That means there'll be some in both Munich and Frankfurt. Lufthansa has said it's focused on the A340-600s because of a growing demand for a premium product, and without an adequate number of A350s with their updated cabin equipment, they really want to strengthen their offering in the market for premium customers, and the Dash 600s again are a short-term fix to that. While Lufthansa has announced orders for the A350-1000 and actually more A350s only in March to boost the group's capacity, they also announced their intent to lease more aircraft on, the A350s, that previously flew with other airlines. So essentially, the operator is scrambling for additional capacity wherever possible. And if that's in the form of leasing, then that's what they must do, even though we've seen reports coming out that the airline is, if anything, leasing too many aircraft now than it wants to. But if it doesn't lease the aircraft on, then it's going to have a problem where it won't be able to serve key destinations. So you see that the situation that they're in is very tricky. Pair all this with the expected arrival of the 777X, which is set to be another fundamental part of their operations, and that taking place 5 years later than expected, now at the earliest 2025, it is just one of the many aircraft types that's been delayed and put the airline in the position that they find themselves in. The 747-400 was also slated to depart, but returned in 2021, so it's safe to say it's been a very hectic period for the airline, not just announcing all of these aircraft would be departing, but then bringing them all back to service, which is costly and timely, and you definitely could have assumed that they ideally would not want to have done this, and instead just had the new equipment arrive on time and transition. The airline, in any case, has at the very least been lucky that while they've arrived late, they've at least had some capacity coming in, like receiving the Boeing 787s, which do provide an essential bit of efficiency and capacity for the services that they are deployed on. This summer, as you may be aware, the Airbus A380 will also be returning to flying with Lufthansa on routes around the globe. The United States will benefit first, however, eventually this network will expand. Again though, the world's largest passenger plane was just another aircraft type that was on the way out and returned, and has given the airline a significant boost in capacity when it needs it the very most. But you see how aircraft deliveries may be misinterpreting how long a pandemic would go on for, and trying to manage the retirement of aircraft really put Lufthansa in a bit of an awkward position. Now, they're just going to simply be awaiting these new aircraft to arrive so they can slowly once more, hopefully for good, transition out these older planes, which are icons of the skies, but for Lufthansa, ones they definitely want to move on. If you have any thoughts, let me know down below in the comments. Thank you once again for your support. Take care and be safe, and I'll see you next time.